In this video we're going to demonstrate how we tie a parachute dry fly that we use for our local carp species. In this particular fly I'm tying on a Mustad Demon circle hook, which is a size 2. This is a little bit larger than a normal hook used for a dry fly, and because of that you need quite a bit of surface area on your hackle and your tail to support the mass of this hook when it's in the water. The addition of any kind of floating will also help. These flies can be tied in size 2s or smaller. Larger gets harder to keep them floating, but they are still effective if you can keep them on the surface. To begin tying this fly, we use a material called fibettes for the tail. They look like paintbrush fibers that aren't added to the paintbrush. They're nice and stiff, non-water absorbent, and we like to use these for tail material. Take a few of those fibers, tie them in at the bend of the hook, making sure they're nice and secure. I like to go under those fibers with a wrap or two of thread in order to help kind of spread them out, providing a little bit more surface area or surface tension on which to support the fly, and then cut off the excess fibers. At this point I take some superfine dubbing. Color is your choice. We generally use the more neutral colors, but they're not necessarily required. Adding that superfine dubbing and spinning it onto the thread, and then wrapping it forward onto the shank of the hook, trying not to collapse your tail too much. And you only need to come forward about a third of the way up the shank of the hook to a stopping point at which you're going to add your wing or your post. For wing material, I like to use something fairly stiff. In this case I'm using kip tail or calf tail. You want to make sure that it's nice and secure, so wrap it in nice and tight. And to get it to stand up relatively straight, I like to put some wraps of thread behind that calf tail. It doesn't have to stand perfectly straight, but the more you can get it to be upright, the easier it is to work with. At this point, again, we don't call it a wing on parachute flies, we call it a post. And so you're going to set it in, trim off the excess in front. In tying in the hackle material, I'm going to use, in this case, 2 grizzle hackles. You could use 2 different color hackles if you wanted bivisible. You don't necessarily need 2 hackles. And in this case I've trimmed off the bottom part of the hackle, which is too fibrous, and left a couple of little nubs in which to anchor those hackles. Make sure they're nice and secure in front of the post. And then I like to make sure that there's a wrap or so behind the post to help secure them, and then in back in front. In tying parachute dry flies, this is the part that's frustrating for a lot of people when they first start, is figuring out a way to wrap these hackles around the post, keeping enough tension on them so that they fray out and give you enough surface area to float the fly, but yet not have so much tension that you're pulling the hackles out or collapsing your post. I like to wrap as many wraps as I possibly can on these larger hooks to help support the fly when it's in the water. At that point you carefully work your thread up and over the hackles and back around the hook without collapsing the material that you've placed on the hook, and then trim off the excess hackle. At this point you can come back with a little more superfine dubbing, spin it onto the thread, and carefully wrap that around the remainder of the hook to provide a little front portion of your fly, ending with a short head. And then whip finish. At this point the hackle, or excuse me, the post, is fairly tall and would cause this fly to fall over, so you trim that post very short, just leaving a small nub. These flies are very effective as far as being able to catch carp or other species, but again with the larger hooks you need to make sure that you have a lot of material around that post in order to provide it enough support to float the fly. These parachute dry flies again can be tied in any number of sizes and any color patterns that you wish, and they're very effective on a lot of species of fish. If you have any questions, please drop us an email. We'll be happy to help you in any way we can.